Jeffrey Dahmer. There are crimes that force us to confront the darkest capabilities of human nature, moments when the distance we maintain from true depravity disappears. Jeffrey Dahmer represented something that went beyond murder. His actions were an excavation into the most disturbing corners of obsession. A 13-year descent so grotesque that even seasoned investigators struggled to comprehend what they found. When police entered his Milwaukee apartment on July 22, 1991, they didn't just discover evidence of homicide. They found what one medical examiner later compared not to a crime scene, but to dismantling someone's private museum of horror. Dahmer killed 17 young men between 1978 and 1991, but the true terror lay in what he did to them. Born on May 21, 1960, he grew increasingly withdrawn as he aged, showing little interest in peers. Instead, he turned to examining animal carcasses and drinking heavily dark indicators of what would surface later. His first victim, 18-year-old Stephen Hicks, was a hitchhiker heading to a rock concert. Just 3 weeks after Dahmer's own high school graduation, he picked Hicks up, took him home for drinks, had sex with him, and killed him with a barbell when Hicks tried to leave. Even years later, Dahmer insisted the killing wasn't planned. Planned or not, it set everything in motion. Nearly a decade passed before he killed again. In September 1987, he took Stephen Tuomi from a Milwaukee bar to a hotel. Dahmer later claimed he awoke to find Tuomi dead with no memory of the act. More killings followed in 1988 and 1989, but by 1990, the pace intensified. By the summer of 1991, Dahmer was killing roughly once a week, and what he was doing had grown even more disturbing. When Dahmer moved into apartment 213 at 924 North 25th Street, the full extent of his compulsions finally emerged. He developed the belief that he could create submissive, permanent partners by drilling holes into victims' skulls and injecting hydrochloric acid or boiling water into their brains. His attempts to create what he called zombies were as horrifying as they were futile, revealing a desperate need for complete control. He lured men from bars, bus stops, and street corners, drugging, raping, and strangling them. After killing them, he engaged in necrophilia and dismemberment, often preserving skulls or other body parts as trophies. He boiled limbs in a steel kettle, dissolved bones in a 57-gallon drum, and stored remains in boxes, refrigerators, and the freezer. Every part of his apartment became part of his routine. Repeated system failures allowed him to continue. In one of the most devastating examples, 14-year-old Konorak Synthesomphone escaped the apartment in May 1991. Neighbors called police after seeing the disoriented, injured boy, but Dahmer convinced officers it was a lover's dispute. They returned the child to him. Konorak became Dahmer's youngest victim soon after, and the incident sparked accusations that prejudice and negligence allowed Dahmer to continue killing. His crimes finally unraveled when Tracy Edwards escaped the apartment on July 22, 1991, with a handcuff dangling from his wrist. After flagging down police, he led them back to Dahmer's door. Inside, officers found a severed head in the refrigerator, additional heads in the bedroom, 7 skulls throughout the apartment, a human heart in the freezer, and 74 Polaroids documenting the dismemberment process. The discovery shocked the nation. At a preliminary hearing on January 13, 1992, Dahmer pleaded guilty but insane to 15 murders. His trial began later that month, but the jury rejected the insanity defense, declaring him legally sane at the time of each killing. On February 17, 1992, Dahmer addressed the court, admitting he knew he was sick or evil and insisting he did not want freedom. He claimed that if he could trade his life to restore his victims, he would. He received 15 consecutive life sentences, followed by a 16th in Ohio for the murder of Stephen Hicks. For the first year of imprisonment, Dahmer was kept in solitary confinement due to threats from other inmates. After requesting less restrictive housing, he was moved to a unit where he worked 2 hours a day cleaning the prison's toilet block. On November 28, 1994, fellow inmate Christopher Scarver killed Dahmer during a work detail in the Columbia Correctional Institution. Scarver later said Dahmer showed no concern for living or dying in his final moments. Jeffrey Dahmer's case remains one of the most disturbing in modern American history, not simply because of his actions, but because of how many opportunities were missed to stop him. Many of his victims were young men from marginalized communities whose disappearances were not treated with urgency. His story is not just about one man's descent into unimaginable depravity. It is also about the failures that allowed 17 families to suffer losses that could have been prevented. Ted Bundy. Charm can be a weapon. Intelligence can be a mask. Beneath a smile that won trust and a demeanor that suggested safety, Theodore Robert Bundy built one of the most nightmarish criminal careers in American history. He seemed to embody everything respectable, educated, articulate, ambitious. He volunteered at a crisis hotline where people dialed for comfort. He worked on political campaigns, attended law school, and navigated social situations with ease. But the polished exterior concealed something society never imagined could exist behind such a face. Bundy wasn't simply a killer. He was a predator who understood that normalcy itself was the most effective disguise, and he used that illusion to hunt for years before anyone understood who he really was. Born on November 24, 1946 in Burlington, Vermont, he first carried the surname Cowell before becoming Bundy after his mother married Johnny Bundy. He grew up in Tacoma, Washington, attended Wilson High School, and eventually graduated from the University of Washington. His life, on paper, looked like the portrait of a young man rising. He was admitted to law school, had a wide social circle, and appeared dependable and charming. Women found him attractive. Friends saw him as confident and driven. No one suspected that beneath the composed exterior was someone harboring violent compulsions that would soon erupt. His first documented attack took place on January 4, 1974, when he broke into the apartment of 18-year-old University of Washington student Karen Sparks and bludgeoned her with a metal rod. She survived but sustained lasting injuries. A month later, 21-year-old Linda Ann Healy vanished from her basement bedroom, leaving behind a neatly made bed stained with blood. Her remains would later be found on Taylor Mountain, alongside other victims. 1974 marked the beginning of Bundy's escalating pattern of abduction and murder. Bundy crafted a method that weaponized empathy. He would wear a cast or use crutches, pretending to struggle with books or equipment, and ask young women for help. When they leaned in, he overpowered them, restrained them, and forced them into his Volkswagen Beetle. He often targeted young white women with long dark hair, parted in the middle. At Lake Sammamish State Park on July 14, 1974, multiple witnesses recalled a polite, attractive man named Ted His Arm in a sling approaching women for help. That same day, Janice Ott and Denise Nasland disappeared within hours of each other. After moving to Salt Lake City later in 1974 for law school, Bundy continued killing. But a crucial moment came when one victim escaped. Carol Duranch fought her way out of Bundy's car after he attempted to handcuff her, later providing a description that helped police identify him. On August 16, 1975, a highway patrol officer stopped Bundy in Granger, Utah. Inside his car were handcuffs, rope, a ski mask, and other items that raised immediate suspicion. He was arrested, convicted of aggravated kidnapping, and sentenced to 1 to 15 years in Utah State Prison. But prison did not end his story. Bundy was transferred to Colorado to face murder charges, and on June 30, 1977, While representing himself and left alone in a law library, he jumped from a courthouse window and fled. He was recaptured 8 days later. 6 months after that, on December 30th, he escaped again, this time squeezing through a hole he had carved into the ceiling of his cell and slipping into the jailer's apartment before walking out the front door. He traveled across the country to Florida. There, on January 15th, 1978, Bundy unleashed one of the most brutal attacks of his life. Entering the Chi Omega sorority house at Florida State University, he assaulted 4 women, murdering Margaret Bowman and Lisa Levy, and severely injuring Karen Chandler and Kathy Kleiner. Shortly afterward, he attacked Cheryl Thomas in her apartment. Weeks later, on February 9th, he kidnapped 12-year-old Kimberly Leach from her school in Lake City. Her remains were found 2 months later. She was his youngest and final known victim. On February 15th, 1978, a Pensacola police officer pulled over a stolen Volkswagen. The driver fought fiercely but was subdued. After refusing to identify himself, he eventually admitted he was Theodore Bundy. Evidence mounted quickly. Bite marks on Lisa Levy matched Bundy's teeth, and hair fibers found at crime scenes linked back to him. The Florida trial became a national spectacle, one of the first widely televised courtroom events. Bundy insisted on representing himself, questioning witnesses and attempting legal maneuvers. In a bizarre moment, he proposed marriage to Carol Ann Boone while she testified. Under Florida law, the declaration was binding. In July 1979, Bundy was convicted of the Chi Omega murders and sentenced to death. In 1980, he received a second death sentence for Kimberly Leach's murder. On death row, he filed appeal after appeal, but as his options disappeared, he began confessing. He admitted to killing 30 women across 7 states between 1974 and 1978, though investigators believed there were more. Some suspected him in cases dating back to 1961. On January 24, 1989, after Governor Bob Martinez signed the final warrant, Bundy was executed in Florida's electric chair at age 42. Outside the prison, crowds celebrated. Many held signs demanding justice. His ashes were scattered in Washington's Cascade Mountains, the same region where he had left several victims. Bundy's case remains a stark study in how charm and normalcy can conceal unimaginable brutality and how a predator can hide in plain sight. John Wayne Gacy. Community involvement can be armor. A successful business, political influence, charitable work, and a clown persona meant to bring joy. These elements create a veneer of trust that shields a person from suspicion. John Wayne Gacy understood this instinctively. He constructed a life that appeared devoted to service, a life that neighbors admired and that parents allowed their children to step into without hesitation. But behind the painted smile, behind the civic enthusiasm and the firm handshake, was something so incomprehensibly dark that when it finally surfaced, suburban Chicago struggled to understand how such horror had lived among them unnoticed. Born on March 17, 1942 in Chicago, Gacy grew up the only son in a family of 3 children. His father, a World War I veteran and machinist, drank heavily and terrorized the household with verbal and physical abuse. Young Gacy longed for approval, but was met instead with contempt, insults, and blows. The damage from this relationship lingered, shaping his warped sense of identity and power. In 1964, Gacy married and moved to Waterloo, Iowa, where he managed 3 Kentucky Fried Chicken restaurants owned by his father-in-law. Outwardly, he seemed settled, a young man with a wife, 2 children, and a promising future. But in 1968, he was charged with sexually assaulting a teenage boy he employed. He was convicted and sentenced to 10 years. His wife filed for divorce, and Gacy served only 18 months before being paroled in June of 1970. Returning to Chicago, he rebuilt his life with unsettling ease. He founded a construction company called PDM Contractors, remarried, and purchased a modest home at 8213 West Somerdale Avenue. He immersed himself in local politics, becoming a Democratic Party precinct captain, and even posed for photographs with First Lady Rosalind Carter. He also joined a clown group called the Jolly Jokers, creating two characters, Pogo and Patches, and performing at hospitals, fundraisers, and birthday parties. To his community, he was a model citizen. But while he entertained children at events, he was murdering young men and boys. His first known victim was 16-year-old Timothy McCoy, whom he met at the Chicago Greyhound station in 1972. McCoy, traveling home to Nebraska, accepted Gacy's invitation to spend the night, only to be stabbed to death in the morning. It marked the beginning of a 6-year homicide spree that would claim at least 33 lives. Gacy developed a pattern that preyed on vulnerability. He targeted runaway teens, young men he employed, and youths drifting through bus stations. He lured them with promises of work, alcohol, or shelter. Once inside his home, he often suggested a magic trick involving handcuffs. When the victims' wrists were secured, Gacy dropped the pretense. He assaulted them, strangled them with a rope or a board, and then disposed of the bodies. 26 victims were buried in the crawl space, 3 lay elsewhere on his property, and 4 were dumped in the Des Plaines River when he ran out of room beneath the house. There were disturbing signs. Neighbors complained about a foul odor coming from the property, which Gacy dismissed as plumbing issues or moisture in the crawl space. Young men were seen entering and leaving the house at strange hours. In 1975, after a 9-year-old boy accused Gacy of sexual assault, police monitored his home, but interviews yielded no actionable evidence. His public image and past conviction, which many around him never knew about, protected him. His downfall began on December 11, 1978, when 15-year-old Robert Piest disappeared. He told his mother he planned to speak with a contractor about a potential job. He never returned. When police learned that contractor was John Wayne Gacy and uncovered his criminal history, suspicion sharpened. A search warrant followed, revealing items that hinted at far more than a missing person case. On December 21st, Gacy was arrested on a minor charge while surveillance continued. The next day, overwhelmed by pressure, he confessed in a rambling, chilling monologue. He admitted to killing 32 young men, attributing his actions to alternate personalities he named Jack and John. He drew diagrams of burial locations and listed several victims by name. The excavation of the crawl space became one of the most shocking crime scene operations in American history. Investigators descended into the dank, dirt-filled cavity and immediately found human remains. Over the next weeks, they uncovered 29 bodies. 4 more were recovered from the river, including Robert Piest. Many of the remains were skeletal, and 9 victims could not initially be identified. Gacy's trial began on February 6, 1980. More than 100 witnesses testified. The defense did not contest that Gacy killed the young men. Instead, they argued he was legally insane. Psychiatrists detailed various personality disorders, but prosecutors showed that Gacy planned his crimes meticulously, hid them effectively, and functioned normally in public life. After less than 2 hours of deliberation, the jury found him guilty of 33 murders, then the most for any individual in U.S. history. He was sentenced to death for 12 of those murders. While imprisoned at Menard Correctional Center, Gacy spent 14 years filing appeals and insisting on shifting, contradictory accounts of the killings. He also began painting, producing clown portraits and other artworks that later became infamous pieces of murderabilia. On May 10, 1994, at age 52, Gacy was executed by lethal injection. A clogged IV line prolonged the procedure to 18 minutes. 5 of his victims remain unidentified. His case endures as one of the most disturbing examples of how a person can live a fully integrated public life while committing atrocities hidden beneath the floorboards of his home. Gary Ridgway. The Green River winds quietly through King County, Washington, a place that should have been remembered for its natural calm. Instead, for more than 2 decades, it was a place of dread where victims surfaced again and again, each discovery deepening a mystery that haunted the Pacific Northwest. From 1982 to 1998, someone hunted vulnerable women with chilling consistency. Sex workers, runaways, and young women surviving on the margins disappeared, and investigators faced a torrent of dead ends. By the time Gary Leon Ridgway was finally arrested in 2001, he had become the most prolific confirmed serial killer in American history. Ridgway was born on February 18, 1949, in Salt Lake City, Utah, and moved to Washington State as a child. His upbringing was marked by bedwetting that persisted into his teens and a domineering mother who publicly humiliated him over his accidents. He struggled academically, repeating his senior year, and was assessed as having an IQ around 80. After high school, he joined the Navy during the Vietnam era, though he never saw combat. He married his first wife in 1970, but the marriage collapsed within 2 years. A second marriage produced a son but ended after 8 years. Even before the Green River murders began, Ridgway exhibited disturbing behavior. In 1980, he was arrested for soliciting an undercover officer, posing as a sex worker, and questioned after allegedly choking a woman during a sexual encounter. Although no charges stuck, these incidents placed him on police radar. Still, nothing prepared investigators for the horror that began unfolding in the summer of 1982. On July 15th, 2 boys discovered the body of 16-year-old Wendy Lee Caulfield floating in the Green River. Within weeks, 4 more women, Deborah Bonner, Marcia Chapman, Opal Mills, and Cynthia Hines, were found nearby, all strangled. Police quickly recognized a pattern and formed the Green River Task Force, launching what became one of the longest serial killer investigations in the nation's history. Ridgway had developed a practiced, efficient method of killing. He prowled Pacific Highway South in a pickup truck spattered with paint from his job at Kenworth Truck Company, where he worked as a painter for almost 30 years. He targeted women he believed police overlooked, sex workers and runaways. To appear harmless, he often showed victims photographs of his son. Once they entered his vehicle, he drove to secluded spots or his home. After sex, he strangled them with his hands or ligatures, then transported their bodies to wooded areas or the river. He sometimes returned to these sites, engaging in necrophilia with decomposing remains. Ridgway's awareness of police procedure made him unusually difficult to capture. He planted cigarette butts and gum from other people at dump sites to mislead investigators. He washed bodies to remove evidence. He scattered victims across remote areas, ensuring no consistent pattern would immediately reveal itself. And he deliberately targeted women who might not be reported missing quickly. There were moments when police came close. In 1983, Marie Malvar's boyfriend followed a truck matching Ridgway's to his home. When officers questioned him, he calmly denied involvement, and without evidence, they let him go. In 1984, Ridgway even contacted the task force offering help and passed a polygraph. In 1987, police searched his home and collected DNA, but technology at the time couldn't link him to victims. Throughout this period, Ridgway lived an outwardly ordinary life. He remarried in 1988, and his wife later insisted she saw no signs of his crimes. Ridgway claimed his marriage slowed his killing, though several victims died after the wedding. By the early 90s, the investigation had dwindled to a single detective. The murders appeared to stop after 1998, leading some to believe the killer had died, been imprisoned elsewhere, or moved away. Then, DNA technology advanced. In March 2001, previously unusable samples were tested again. This time, the results linked Ridgway to several victims. On November 30th, 2001, Gary Ridgway was finally arrested. Initially, he denied everything, but faced with DNA evidence, he began confessing. Over months of interviews, he described murders with unsettling calm, admitting to 48 victims. He drew maps, revealed dump sites, and led detectives to remain still undiscovered. He said he killed so many women he struggled to remember them all, and targeted sex workers because he believed they wouldn't be investigated as thoroughly. Prosecutors made a difficult choice: to bring closure to dozens of families and uncover as many victims as possible. They offered Ridgway a deal: avoid the death penalty in exchange for full confessions and cooperation. Ridgway accepted. On November 5th, 2003, he pleaded guilty to 48 counts of aggravated murder. Families packed the courtroom as he recited the names of his victims. Some were still unidentified, referred to as Jane Doe. Judge Richard Jones sentenced him to 48 consecutive life sentences with no possibility of parole, plus additional years for evidence tampering. The story was not over. In 2010, the remains of Rebecca Marrero were found. Ridgway pleaded guilty to her murder in 2011. In 2023, remains discovered in 1985 were identified as 15-year-old Lori Ann Razpotnik. In 2024, Ridgway claimed he could help locate more bodies, though authorities did not confirm whether any were found. Ridgway once claimed he killed as many as 80 women. Officially, he is convicted of 49 murders, though several victims remain missing and uncharged. He continues to serve life sentences at Washington State Penitentiary, a grim reminder of how long a predator can operate when preying on the vulnerable. Richard Ramirez. Summer in Southern California usually meant long days at the beach, outdoor concerts, and open windows to catch the evening breeze. But the summer of 1985 was different. As temperatures rose, so did the terror gripping Los Angeles and nearby communities. Residents bolted windows shut, installed extra locks, and slept with weapons nearby. Parents kept children indoors after dark. Hardware stores sold out of deadbolts and security systems. The reason was a shadow moving through neighborhoods at night, striking without pattern or mercy, leaving scenes so disturbing even seasoned detectives struggled to process them. He would later be called the Night Stalker, but for months, as the body count rose, he was simply an unseen force turning the region into a landscape of fear. Ricardo Leyva Munoz Ramirez was born February 29, 1960, in El Paso, Texas, the youngest of 5 children of Mexican immigrants. His father worked as a railway laborer and was known for violent alcoholic rages that often resulted in abuse. Ramirez struggled in school and began using drugs and alcohol by age 10. The most significant influence came from his cousin Miguel, a decorated Vietnam War veteran who told graphic stories and showed photographs of atrocities he claimed to have committed, including assaults and killings. At 13, Ramirez witnessed Miguel shoot his wife in the face during a domestic dispute. The psychological impact of this exposure to violence would later manifest in increasingly disturbing ways. As a teenager, Ramirez dropped out of high school and drifted to Los Angeles. He supported himself through petty theft and burglary, was briefly jailed for stealing a car, and developed cocaine and other drug addictions. Authorities did not yet know that in April 1984, 9-year-old Mei Leong was assaulted and murdered in the basement of a San Francisco hotel where Ramirez stayed. Her body was left hanging from a pipe. The crime went unsolved for 25 years, until DNA finally linked Ramirez to the scene in 2009, revealing his crimes had begun earlier than investigators thought. His first recognized attack occurred June 28, 1984, when 79-year-old Jenny Vinkow was found stabbed and nearly decapitated in her Glassell Park apartment. Ramirez had removed a window screen to gain entry, leaving a fingerprint that would later prove crucial. 8 months passed before he struck again, but by March 1985, his attacks accelerated dramatically. Ramirez was particularly terrifying because he had no victim profile. He attacked men, women, children, and the elderly. Victims were white, Latino, Asian, aged 6 to 83. He used any available weapons: guns, knives, hammers, tire irons, or his bare hands. Sometimes he shot male victims immediately to spend more time assaulting females. Other times, he forced entire families to participate. He carved pentagrams into walls and bodies, made victims swear allegiance to Satan, and seemed to take as much pleasure in the psychological terror as the physical violence. On March 27, 1985, he shot 64-year-old Vincent Zazzara and his wife Maxine in Whittier, mutilating Maxine's body and carving out her eyes. Police discovered footprints from a rare Avia sneaker recently introduced in the USS. 2 weeks later, he attacked a woman while her 12-year-old son was locked in a closet. In May, he beat 2 elderly sisters with a hammer so violently the handle cracked. One survived. In June and July, assaults increased, including murders of children, couples, and survivors, forced to declare allegiance to Satan. Law enforcement initially struggled to connect the crimes, which seemed random. Detective Gil Carrillo suspected a single perpetrator based on victim and method variety, and consulted veteran Frank Salerno, who had worked the Hillside Strangler case. Together, they pieced together evidence: recurring Avia shoe prints, matching bullet casings, and witness descriptions of a tall, thin man with rotting teeth and a distinctive odor. The breakthrough came August 24, 1985, when Ramirez broke into a Mission Viejo home, shot William Carnes 3 times, and assaulted his fiancée Inez Erickson. He told Erickson to warn everyone the Night Stalker had been there. She survived and provided a detailed description. Police found Ramirez's stolen car with a fingerprint on the rearview mirror. Using a new computerized system containing records for criminals born after January 1960, investigators got a match: Richard Ramirez, born February 1960, with a history of petty crimes. On August 30th, authorities released his name and photograph to the media, hoping public awareness would aid capture. The next day, unaware of his notoriety, Ramirez returned from Arizona. Seeing his mugshot in a Spanish-language newspaper, he attempted to flee on foot, tried to carjack a woman, but her husband struck him with a fence post. A crowd beat him until police arrived. The man who had terrorized California for over a year was finally in custody. His trial began July 1988. Ramirez theatrically displayed his satanic beliefs, drawing a pentagram on his palm, shouting, "Hail Satan," and cultivating an image that drew a disturbing following of admirers dressed similarly. When one juror was murdered in August 1989, terror swept the jury, though her death was unrelated. On September 20th, 1989, after 22 days, the jury returned guilty on all 43 charges: 13 murders, 5 attempted murders, 11 sexual assaults, 14 burglaries. The penalty phase resulted in 19 recommendations for execution. On November 7th, Judge Michael Tynan sentenced Ramirez to die in California's gas chamber, noting his crimes showed cruelty, callousness, and viciousness beyond any human understanding. Ramirez famously responded, "I am beyond good and evil," adding, "Big deal. Death always went with the territory. See you in Disneyland." He never expressed remorse. While on death row at San Quentin, he maintained a cult following. Married one admirer in 1996, later divorced, and was engaged to another at the time of his death. He spent 23 years filing appeals, all denied. On August 7, 2006, the California Supreme Court upheld his conviction. Ramirez never faced execution. On June 7, 2013, at 53, he died from B-cell lymphoma. The man who plunged Southern California into fear died not by the state's hand but by mortality itself. His case remains studied in criminal psychology as a chilling example of how childhood trauma, substance abuse, and exposure to violence can create acts that defy comprehension. The summer of 1985 left scars on Southern California that have never fully healed, a reminder that sometimes real monsters move through neighborhoods after dark. Dennis Rader. Wichita, Kansas was a place where neighbors knew each other, kids rode bikes after dark, and unlocked doors were common. But beginning in January of 1974, that sense of safety crumbled. Someone was killing families in their homes, binding and strangling victims with mechanical precision. The killer sent taunting letters to newspapers, naming himself BTK: bind, torture, kill. After 1979, the letters stopped. The murders seemed to stop. No arrest came. No suspect emerged. BTK vanished, leaving the city in fear for decades. Dennis Lynn Rader was born March 9, 1945, in Pittsburgh, Kansas. He grew up in Wichita with 3 younger brothers. His father worked for Kansas Gas Service and had served as a Marine. His mother was a bookkeeper. The family attended Zion Lutheran Church. Dennis was a Boy Scout who fished and read comic books, but dark tendencies emerged early. He later admitted to torturing and killing small animals and developing sexual fantasies involving bondage that intensified with age. After graduating Wichita Heights High School, Rader joined the U.S. Air Force in 1966, serving until 1970, with deployments to Japan, Greece, and Turkey. He married Paula Dietz in May of 1971. They had 2 children, Brian, born in 1975, and Kerry, born in 1978. Outwardly, he seemed exemplary, working various jobs, attending Wichita State University, installing home security systems, leading Cub Scouts, and serving as church council president. The irony of a serial killer installing security systems and leading children's groups would later seem incomprehensible. The first murders occurred January 15, 1974. Rader had stalked former co-worker Julie Otero. He cut the Otero family's phone line and waited inside. When Joseph, Julie, and 2 children returned, he forced them into a bedroom. He strangled Joseph, then Julie, then the children, hanging 11-year-old Josephine from a basement pipe for sexual gratification. He took a radio and watch as souvenirs. 3 months later, on April 4, 1974, he broke into Catherine Bright's home. Her brother Kevin arrived unexpectedly. In the struggle, Rader shot Kevin, who survived. He then stabbed Catherine repeatedly. She died. This first failure seemed to compel him to announce himself publicly. In October of 1974, he sent a letter to the Wichita Eagle with directions to another letter hidden in a library textbook. That letter confessed to the Otero murders and included a message defining him. The code words for me will be bind them, torture them, kill them, BTK. The moniker stuck, confirming to Wichita that a serial killer was active. Rader remained quiet while his wife bore their children. Though investigators believe he stalked victims and practiced methods, he resumed killing in March of 1977, strangling Shirley Vian after locking her children in a bathroom. In December of that year, he killed Nancy Fox with a belt, then called police from a payphone to report the homicide, demonstrating arrogance. In January of 1978, he sent a poem about Vian to a newspaper, followed weeks later by a letter claiming responsibility for Vian, Fox, and another victim. He continued killing without publicizing crimes. In April of 1985, he murdered 53-year-old Maureen Hedge, his neighbor. In September of that year, he killed 28-year-old Vicky Wegerle, posing as a telephone repairman. In January of 1991, he murdered 62-year-old Dolores Davis. After Davis, the killings stopped. For 13 years, Rader lived his double life, later admitting he had planned another murder before being arrested. The investigation had gone cold. Despite hundreds of leads, police had no suspect. Parents monitored children closely. Home security became obsessional. Fear persisted for decades. What broke the case was Rader's ego. In March of 2004, after 25 years of silence, he sent a letter to the Wichita Eagle, including crime scene photos from the Wegerle murder. Over months, he sent additional communications with victim jewelry, drawings, and methods, performing for attention and recognition. In one communication, he asked if police could trace a computer disk. Believing assurances, he sent a floppy disk in February of 2005. Metadata revealed use at Christ Lutheran Church and linked to a user named Dennis. Police obtained a DNA sample from his daughter Kerry, matching semen from the 1974 crime scene. On February 25, 2005, they arrested Rader near home. BTK, who had terrorized Wichita for decades, was a municipal compliance officer, family man, and church leader, hiding in plain sight. During interrogation, Rader confessed to all 10 murders in clinical detail, showing maps and explaining methods, including hit clothes worn during attacks. During dormant periods, he photographed himself in bondage and women's clothing. He admitted planning another murder in 2004 before the urge to communicate with police overtook him. On June 27, 2005, Rader pleaded guilty to 10 counts of murder. Kansas had no death penalty statute at the time, so he couldn't be sentenced to die. On August 18th, after a 2-day sentencing hearing, Judge Greg Wallace sentenced him to 10 consecutive life terms, a minimum of 175 years without parole. Rader showed little emotion. Now 79, Rader remains incarcerated at El Dorado Correctional Facility in Kansas, in solitary. His daughter, Kerry, published a memoir in 2019, detailing her trauma and healing. Investigators continue reviewing cold cases in Oklahoma and Missouri. He has given interviews and collaborated on a book, claiming to help society understand a serial killer's mind, though many see it as feeding his need for attention. His case remains a study in compartmentalization, a man living as a contributing citizen while committing unfathomable acts. Families of his 10 victims live knowing their loved ones died to satisfy his desire for control while he lived freely among them until his arrogance betrayed him. David Berkowitz. New York City, in the summer of 1976, was a place trying to reinvent itself. The city had narrowly avoided bankruptcy the previous year, and a sense of cautious optimism had begun to take hold. Couples went on dates. Young people gathered at discos. Then someone started shooting people in parked cars, and that fragile sense of security evaporated overnight. The attack seemed motiveless, the victims random. As the body count rose and months passed without an arrest, the city transformed. Women dyed their long dark hair blonde or cut it short. Nightclubs emptied. Parks cleared at sunset. Then the killer began writing letters, taunting police and newspapers, naming himself the son of Sam and promising he would never stop. For 13 months, David Berkowitz held America's largest city hostage to his compulsions. David Richard Berkowitz was born on June 1, 1953, in Brooklyn, New York, originally named Richard David Falco. His mother gave him up for adoption days after his birth. Nathan and Pearl Berkowitz, a Jewish couple from the Bronx, adopted him and renamed him David Richard Berkowitz. Raised as their only child in a working-class neighborhood, He played baseball and attended Hebrew school, but fractures appeared early. David struggled with feelings of abandonment even before learning he was adopted at age 7. When his adoptive mother Pearl died of breast cancer in 1967, 14-year-old David was devastated. The loss triggered a descent into increasingly antisocial behavior. In 1971, at age 18, Berkowitz joined the United States Army. He served for 3 years, including time in South Korea, and distinguished himself as a marksman before receiving an honorable discharge in 1974. Returning to New York, he bounced between jobs, eventually taking a position at the Bronx Post Office in 1976. Living alone, he became increasingly isolated and developed what he later described as an obsession with starting fires. According to his diary, he set approximately 1,500 fires throughout New York City during the mid-1970s. On July 29, 1976, shortly after 1 in the morning, 18-year-old Donna Lauria sat in a parked Oldsmobile outside her apartment in the Pelham Bay section of the Bronx. Talking with 19-year-old Jody Valenti, a man approached the passenger side, pulled a .44 caliber revolver from a paper bag, and fired 5 shots through the windshield. Lauria died instantly from a bullet to the neck. Valenti survived a wound to her thigh. The shooter walked away silently. The attacks continued with disturbing irregularity. On October 23, 1976, 20-year-old Carl Denaro was shot in Queens and survived after extensive head surgery. On January 30, 1977, 26-year-old Christine Freund was shot while sitting in a car with her fiancé and died hours later. On March 8, 1977, 19-year-old Virginia Voskerikian, a Barnard College student, was walking home from class when the shooter approached her. She raised her textbooks in defense, but was killed instantly. Police established a task force called Operation Omega, eventually involving more than 300 detectives. Then came the letter that gave the killer his infamous name. On April 17, 1977, 18-year-old Valentina Suriani and her 20-year-old boyfriend, Alexander Esau, were shot while sitting in a parked car. Both died. Near their bodies, police found a handwritten letter addressed to Captain Joseph Borelli. The message claimed to be from a monster commanded to kill by a father figure named Sam. He signed it, "I am the son of Sam." A second letter arrived in May, addressed to Jimmy Breslin, a columnist for the New York Daily News. The Daily News published portions on June 6, 1977, and the city's fear reached new heights. On July 31, 1977, 20-year-old Robert Violante and 19-year-old Stacy Moskowitz were shot while sitting in a parked car in Brooklyn during their first date. Moskowitz died from a gunshot to the head. Violante survived but was partially blind. A witness walking her dog saw parking enforcement officers ticketing cars that night. Detectives tracked down tickets issued near the crime scene and found one written for a cream-colored Ford Galaxy registered to David Berkowitz of Yonkers. On August 10, 1977, police arrested Berkowitz outside his apartment. Inside his vehicle, officers found a loaded .44 caliber revolver and a letter threatening further violence. Asked if he was the son of Sam, Berkowitz smiled and replied yes. During interrogation, he confessed to all 8 shootings, claiming Sam Carr's dog had been possessed by a demon that commanded him to kill. Despite his bizarre claims, psychiatrists concluded Berkowitz understood right from wrong and could stand trial. On May 8, 1978, he withdrew his insanity defense and pleaded guilty to 6 counts of murder and 7 counts of attempted murder. On June 12, 1978, Judge Joseph Corso sentenced him to 25 years to life for each murder, to be served consecutively, for a total of 365 years. Berkowitz became eligible for parole in 2002 and has been denied at every hearing. He has stated he does not deserve parole and should remain in prison for life. He is currently 71 and remains incarcerated at Shawangunk Correctional Facility in upstate New York. He continues to profess his Christian faith, claiming to have converted in 1987. His case transformed law enforcement's approach to serial killer investigations and demonstrated the power of forensic documentation, as the parking ticket that led to his arrest was among the first cases where mundane evidence solved a series of murders. The summer of 1977 remains etched in the memory of New Yorkers, a time when one man with a revolver held millions in constant fear. Ed Kemper. Height can be an advantage in life. It commands attention, suggests strength, inspires confidence. At 6 feet 9 inches tall with an IQ of 145, Edmund Emil Kemper III possessed gifts that should have translated into success. Instead, those attributes became instruments of horror. His size allowed him to overpower victims effortlessly. His intelligence helped him evade detection, manipulate investigators, and exploit the trust of young women seeking rides along California highways. Between May of 1972 and April of 1973, Kemper murdered 6 college students in the Santa Cruz area, earning him the moniker the Co-Ed Killer. These murders were merely the culmination of a pathology that began earlier and ended with a revelation of what had driven him all along. Edmund Kemper was born on December 18, 1948, in Burbank, California. His parents, Edmund Jr. and Clarnell, already had 2 daughters and later had another, making Edmund the only son. His father was a World War II veteran and electrician. His mother, an alcoholic, was domineering, verbally abusive, and emotionally unstable. When his parents divorced in 1957, 9-year-old Edmund moved with his mother and sisters to Montana. The relationship deteriorated rapidly. Clarnell berated him constantly, told him no woman would ever love him, and forced him to sleep in the basement, claiming she feared he might harm his sisters. The psychological damage was profound and lasting. By age 10, Kemper exhibited disturbing behavior. He buried the family cat alive, decapitated it, and mounted its head on a stick. He mutilated his sister's dolls and played execution games pretending to be sent to the gas chamber. At 14, he ran away to California, seeking his father, who sent him to live with his paternal grandparents on their ranch in North Fork. He later described his grandmother as emasculating and his grandfather as senile. Resentment festered until it exploded. On August 27, 1964, 15-year-old Kemper shot his grandmother in the head and back during an argument, then stabbed her repeatedly. When his grandfather returned, Kemper shot him in the driveway. He called his mother, who told him to contact police. Kemper explained he wanted to see what it felt like to kill his grandmother and shot his grandfather because he expected anger. Court psychiatrists diagnosed him with paranoid schizophrenia and sent him to Atascadero State Hospital, a maximum security facility for mentally ill convicts, where he remained 5 years. At Atascadero, Kemper became a model patient, participating in tests and helping administer them to others. Psychiatrists concluded he had been misdiagnosed and recommended release. On his 21st birthday, December 18, 1969, he was paroled. Against advice, he moved back with his mother in Santa Cruz, working as an administrative assistant at the University of California, Santa Cruz, a move that would prove catastrophic. Kemper attempted to join the California Highway Patrol, but was rejected for exceeding the height limit. He worked various jobs and suffered a motorcycle accident that injured his arm. He began cruising areas near the university, picking up young female hitchhikers. At first, he gave rides and released them, practicing his approach. Then he stopped letting them go. On May 7, 1972, He picked up 18-year-old Marianne Pesce and 19-year-old Anita Lucchesa, Fresno State students. He drove them to a secluded area, forced them into the trunk, and stabbed them to death. He brought their bodies home, decapitated them, engaged in necrophilia, dismembered the remains, and disposed of them. On the way, police stopped him for a broken taillight, but did not check the trunk. On September 14, 1972, he picked up 15-year-old Aiko Ku, suffocated her, and repeated his ritual. On January 7, 1973, he murdered 19-year-old Cindy Scholl, burying her head in his mother's backyard, facing her bedroom window. On February 5, 1973, he killed 24-year-old Rosalind Thorpe and 23-year-old Alice Liu, using a parking sticker from his mother, shooting them, then continuing his ritual at home. Their remains were later found near Highway 1. Throughout, Kemper maintained friendly relations with local police, frequenting a bar called the Jury Room. Officers knew him as Big Ed, unaware he was the co-ed killer. The end came on Easter weekend, 1973. On Good Friday, April 20th, he entered his mother's bedroom, bludgeoned her with a claw hammer, slit her throat, and decapitated her. He removed her larynx, later saying it seemed fitting. He invited her friend, 59-year-old Sally Hallett, and murdered her in the same manner. He fled east, reaching Pueblo, Colorado. On April 23, 1973, he called Santa Cruz police and confessed. Officers initially thought it a prank. When they investigated, they found exactly as described. He confessed to all 8 murders in clinical detail. Kemper was charged with 8 counts of murder. His trial began in October 1973. The defense claimed insanity, but prosecutors showed he planned carefully, understood right from wrong, and had successfully hidden his activities. On November 5, 1973, he was found guilty. When asked what punishment he thought he deserved, he replied he should be tortured to death. He received 8 concurrent life terms. Edmund Kemper is now 76 and remains incarcerated at the California Medical Facility in Vacaville. He has been denied parole multiple times, most recently in 2024, as he is wheelchair-bound, has diabetes and coronary heart disease, and remains high risk. In 2022, he grabbed a female staff member inappropriately, saying he wanted to change the mood. He waived his 2024 parole hearing and is next eligible in 2031. His case is studied in criminal psychology and forensics. He contributed to the FBI's Criminal Personality Research Project in the 1970s, helping shape criminal profiling. Actor Cameron Britton portrayed him in Netflix's Mindhunter. Kemper acknowledges he should never be released. His compulsions remain. His story shows how childhood abuse, maternal domination, and violent fantasies can create someone capable of acts beyond comprehension. The 6 young women he killed were victims of a man whose rage at his mother manifested as violence against women resembling her in age and appearance. Albert DeSalvo. Boston, in the early 1960s, was a city of unlocked doors and unguarded trust. Single women lived alone without alarm systems. Neighbors helped strangers carrying groceries. If someone knocked claiming to be a repairman or detective, people opened their doors without hesitation. That innocence died between June of 1962 and January of 1964 when 13 women, aged 19 to 85, were sexually assaulted and strangled in their own apartments. The murders sent waves of terror through Massachusetts. Women installed extra locks, refused to open doors, and slept with weapons nearby. The press dubbed the killer the Boston Strangler, a phantom who could talk his way past any barrier and leave victims posed to shock whoever found them. For decades, Albert DeSalvo was thought to be that phantom, though his case remains controversial, with confession, DNA, and doubt combining into a picture that refuses to fully resolve. Albert Henry DeSalvo was born on September 3, 1931, in Chelsea, Massachusetts, one of 6 children in a household defined by violence. His father was an alcoholic who beat his wife, brought sex workers home, and sold his children into labor for money. Young Albert witnessed horrors that shaped him irreversibly. He grew strong and joined the army in 1948, serving in Germany, where he met and married Irmgard Beck in 1953. Returning to Massachusetts, they had 2 children. DeSalvo worked as a handyman, but beneath his conventional life, compulsions developed he could not control. In the late 1950s, DeSalvo began a pattern of sexual offenses. He earned the nickname the Measuring Man for knocking on doors, claiming to represent a modeling agency, measuring young women and fondling them. Arrested in March of 1960, he was sentenced to 2 years, serving less than 1. His crimes escalated, earning the Green Man moniker as he broke into homes across Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, and New Hampshire in green work clothes. He tied women to beds, assaulted them, and apologized before leaving. Police eventually linked hundreds of assaults to the Green Man. Meanwhile, Boston endured the Boston Strangler murders. On June 14, 1962, 55-year-old Anna Sleezers was found strangled, sexually assaulted, and posed with a bathrobe cord. 2 weeks later, 85-year-old Mary Mullen died, likely from fear during an attack. On June 30th, 68-year-old Nina Nichols and 65-year-old Helen Blake were strangled. Murders continued through summer and fall, including 75-year-old Ida Erger and 67-year-old Jane Sullivan. The pattern shifted in December with 20-year-old Sophie Clark and 23-year-old Patricia Bissett. The killings continued into 1963 with 69-year-old Mary Brown, 23-year-old Beverly Sammons, 58-year-olds Evelyn Corbin and Joan Graff. The final victim was 19-year-old Mary Sullivan, found strangled on January 4, 1964. She had been sexually assaulted and posed to maximize horror. Police had no viable suspect. Despite thousands of interviews and leads, the murders stopped after Sullivan, leaving uncertainty about whether the killer had died, moved, or satisfied his dark need. The break came in October of 1964, when DeSalvo broke into a home in East Cambridge, posing as a detective, tying up a woman, and sexually assaulting her. She provided a description leading to DeSalvo. When his photograph was published, multiple women identified him as the Green Man. While held at Bridgewater State Hospital for evaluation, he confessed to another inmate, George Nassar, that he was the Boston Strangler. Nassar told his attorney, F. Lee Bailey, who took DeSalvo's defense. DeSalvo gave detailed confessions to all 13 murders, describing crime scenes accurately, including apartments, body positions, and ligatures. However, some details were wrong. He confused victim names, and the murders showed varying patterns and motivations. Some victims elderly, others young, some raped, others not. Serial killers typically follow patterns. These killings seemed inconsistent for one perpetrator. Bailey opted not to have DeSalvo tried for the stranglings, where evidence was circumstantial and the death penalty possible, but for the Green Man assaults, where conviction was certain. On January 10, 1967, DeSalvo went on trial for robbery and sexual assault. Psychiatric testimony revealed his Boston Strangler confessions, but he was never charged with those murders. He was convicted of the Green Man assaults and sentenced to life in prison. Transferred to Walpole's State Prison, DeSalvo became a model inmate. On November 25, 1973, he was stabbed to death in the infirmary. His murder was never solved, speculated as revenge, or linked to his claims of the stranglings. For decades, debate persisted. In 2001, his body was exhumed for DNA testing on Mary Sullivan's case. Initial results showed no match. In 2013, advanced testing matched semen from Sullivan to DeSalvo through his nephew's DNA with 99.9% certainty. Authorities confirmed he raped and murdered Mary Sullivan. Doubt remains about the other 12 victims. Some investigators believe DeSalvo killed all 13. Others argue multiple killers may have been involved, with DeSalvo possibly claiming others' crimes. Albert DeSalvo is a study in contradictions, a man who confessed to being one of America's most infamous serial killers, yet was never tried for those murders, whose DNA decades later proved him guilty of at least one, and whose prison death erased the chance to fully know the truth. He was 42 at death, taking secrets to the grave. The Boston Strangler case changed how women approached safety, ended trusting strangers at the door, and left families with answers that remain incomplete. Whether DeSalvo was a serial killer or a violent sexual offender claiming others' murders may never be definitively known, making his story a permanent fixture in criminal history. Richard Biegenwald. Some killers wear masks of normalcy so convincing that nobody suspects the darkness beneath. Others never bother with the pretense at all. Richard Biegenwald belonged to the latter category. From the moment he set his family home ablaze at age 5, through psychiatric wards and reform schools, past electroshock treatments and prison sentences, his trajectory pointed in only one direction. He was a storm gathering strength, and when authorities released him after 17 years behind bars for his first killing, the people of the Jersey Shore had no idea what was coming. Richard Fran Biegenwald was born on August 24, 1940, in Staten Island, New York. His father's fists and his mother's absence created a boy who sought attention through destruction. Fires, theft, alcohol, and gambling filled his early years. By 9, Bellevue Hospital administered electroshock therapy. By 11, he set himself on fire. The state training school for boys in Warwick became his home, where he incited theft and escape attempts rather than reform. This cycle continued until 1958, when 18-year-old Biegenwald and an accomplice entered a grocery store in Bayonne, New Jersey. The proprietor, Stephen Sladowski, an attorney and assistant city prosecutor, was shot by Biegenwald. 2 days later, police captured him in Maryland after he fired a shotgun at state troopers. He received a life sentence. 17 years passed inside New Jersey prisons. In 1975, parole officers deemed him rehabilitated and released him. He took odd jobs and began a relationship with 16-year-old Diane, his neighbor and future wife, despite his criminal history. By the early 1980s, the couple settled in Asbury Park with Darren Fitzgerald, a former prison associate who would later help unravel Biegenwald's crimes. The Jersey Shore became his hunting ground. On August 27, 1982, 18-year-old Anna Olizovich sat on a boardwalk bench in Asbury Park with her friend Denise Hunter. Biegenwald approached, offered marijuana, and lured her to his car. At his apartment, he shot her 4 times in the head, wrapped her in a green plastic bag, and hid her body in the garage. The next day, he attempted to involve 22-year-old Teresa Smith in killing Anna. But when she refused, Biegenwald finished the act himself. He later gave Smith a black and gold ring taken from Anna. Her body was dumped behind a Burger King, discovered in January 1983. Anna was not his only victim. On Halloween night, 1981, 17-year-old Maria Cialella was walking along Route 88 when Biegenwald took her. He shot her twice, dismembered her, and buried her in his mother's Staten Island backyard. 17-year-old Betsy Bacon disappeared on November 20th, 1982. He shot and buried her in Tinton Falls. 34-year-old William Ward, a video game operator, died after an argument. executed with a silenced weapon and buried in Neptune Township. 18-year-old Deborah Osborne was another victim. Authorities confirmed 6 victims, though Biegenwald claimed to have killed over 100, a number unverified, but told with pride rather than remorse. The unraveling began with Teresa Smith, who contacted police after leaving the Biegenwald household. Her testimony about Anna's body pointed investigators to Richard. When officers surrounded his Asbury Park apartment on January 22, 1983, they found pipe bombs, firearms including a machine gun, knockout drops, marijuana, live snakes, and detailed floor plans of local businesses, revealing plans for further violence. Under questioning, Darren Fitzgerald led police to burial sites, including Maria Cialella's dismembered remains and another unidentified female. Trials stretched across 1983 and 1984. In November 1983, a jury found Biegenwald responsible for Anna Olizevich's death. Prosecutor James Fagan described how he had hunted that night not for drugs but for someone to kill. The jury agreed, though the sentence would later be commuted when New Jersey abolished capital punishment in 2007. Additional trials produced multiple life sentences for his other killings. Biegenwald maintained a not guilty plea for Maria Cialella, while pleading guilty to other charges strategically. Richard Biegenwald remained incarcerated at New Jersey State Prison in Trenton for life. He died on March 10, 2008, at St. Francis Medical Center from respiratory and kidney failure. He was 67. The man who had walked away from one murder conviction with a second chance used that freedom to leave a trail of bodies along the Jersey shore. Anna's boyfriend later dismissed the significance of the black and gold ring Biegenwald took as a trophy. But families knew the truth. The ring symbolized what he did. Families attended hearing after hearing, their lives permanently altered by a man who killed for the simple thrill of watching someone die. The Jersey Shore remembers him not as Richard Biegenwald, the person, but as the thrill killer whose decades of violence ended not with execution or redemption, but with the quiet failure of an aging body in a prison hospital ward.